My daughter stood up at my 65th birthday dinner, clinked her wine glass to get everyone's attention, and announced, "Before we cut the cake, I have a special gift for Mom, something that might finally explain why she's always been different from the rest of us Hendersons." She pulled out a DNA testing kit and placed it in front of me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Happy birthday, Mom. Maybe this will help you find where you really belong." The restaurant went silent. 23 people, family, friends, neighbors from our Toronto suburb, all stared at me. My hands shook as I looked at the box, then at my daughter Vanessa's face. She was 42 years old, successful, beautiful, and in that moment, a complete stranger to me. "Vanessa, what is this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Oh, come on, Mom, we've all wondered." She glanced at her younger sister Claire, who was studying her plate intensely. "You don't look like Grandma Henderson. You don't have Dad's drive or ambition. You've always been, well, you know, the odd one out. Maybe you were switched at the hospital or something. Wouldn't that be wild? My husband Richard, my late husband, I should say, he'd been gone for 3 years, would have stopped this. Richard would have stood up, told Vanessa to sit down and apologize. But Richard wasn't there, and I suddenly felt very, very alone. "I think perhaps we should do this privately," I managed to say. "Why?" "We're all family here. Well, supposedly." Vanessa laughed, and a few people gave uncomfortable chuckles. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying what everyone's been thinking. You were adopted, right? Or maybe Grandma had an affair. It would explain so much." I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. "I'm sorry, everyone. I'm not feeling well. Thank you for coming." As I gathered my purse, Vanessa called after me. "The kit expires in 6 months, Mom. Just think about it. Don't you want to know the truth?" I left the restaurant with my dignity in tatters and 23 witnesses to my humiliation. My hands were still shaking when I got home to my small apartment in North York. After Richard died, I'd downsized from our family home in Forest Hill. Vanessa had wanted to sell it immediately, split the proceeds. Claire had been quieter about it, but I could see the same calculation in her eyes. They'd both done well for themselves. Vanessa was a corporate lawyer, Claire a surgeon, but they'd expected a larger inheritance than Richard had left them. Most of his estate had gone to me, with provisions for the girls in his will. But it wasn't the millions they'd expected. Richard's business had struggled in his final years. There was enough for me to live comfortably, enough for them to receive a modest inheritance when I passed, but not the windfall they'd imagined. I sat in my small living room, the DNA kit on the coffee table in front of me like an accusation. The truth was, I had always felt different from the Hendersons. Richard's mother, Dorothy, had been a formidable woman, tall, sharp-featured, with steely gray eyes, and an MBA from Western. She'd built a successful chain of boutique hotels across Ontario. Richard had inherited her business acumen and her granite determination. Both our daughters had too. And then there was me, Margaret Sullivan, who grew up in a modest bungalow in Hamilton, whose mother worked at the steel mill's administrative office, and whose father was a high school English teacher. I'd met Richard at University of Toronto, where I was studying library science, and he was in business school. I'd been drawn to his confidence, his certainty about the world. He'd been drawn to, well, I never quite knew what he'd been drawn to in me. Dorothy Henderson had made her disappointment clear from the beginning. Richard could have had anyone, she'd said once, thinking I was out of earshot. Instead, he chooses a girl with no family connections, no money, no breeding. But Richard had loved me. I was certain of that. We'd had 43 years together, and they'd been mostly good years. He'd been supportive, kind, gentle. If he'd ever regretted his choice, he'd never shown it. Still, I'd always felt like I was playing a part. The Henderson wife, the Henderson mother. Never quite fitting, never quite enough. I picked up the DNA kit. What harm could it do? Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I'd been adopted and my parents had never told me. They were both gone now, Mom for 15 years, Dad for 23. I couldn't ask them. I swabbed my cheek and sent it off the next morning. 3 weeks later, I was at my volunteer shift at the Toronto Public Library. I'd been a librarian for 35 years before retiring when I got the email. DNA results available. Click here to view. I waited until I got home, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at my laptop. My heart was pounding. The results loaded. According to the test, I shared 50% DNA with Dorothy Henderson. I stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. Dorothy Henderson was Richard's mother. I shared no blood relation with Dorothy Henderson. This had to be a mistake. But then I saw the relationship designation. Mother. The teacup slipped from my hands, spilling Earl Grey across my lap. I barely noticed. Dorothy Henderson was my mother, which meant Richard was my... I ran to the bathroom and vomited. No, 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 no. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake, a contamination in the lab, a mix-up with the samples. But as I splashed water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror, I saw it. I'd always thought I looked nothing like the Hendersons, but that wasn't true, was it? I had Dorothy's nose, her hands, that specific way her left eyebrow arched when she was skeptical. How had I never seen it? I went back to the computer with shaking hands and started clicking through the DNA matches. There were dozens of them, distant cousins, third and fourth connections. And then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Claire Henderson. Relationship, niece. Vanessa Henderson. Relationship, niece. My daughters were my nieces. I'd married my brother. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to breathe. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But the DNA didn't lie. I called my oldest friend, Helen, with trembling fingers. We'd known each other since university, before I'd met Richard. She was the only person I could think of who might help me make sense of this. Margaret, what's wrong? Her voice was immediately concerned. Helen, I need to tell you something. Something impossible. And I told her everything, the birthday dinner, Vanessa's cruel gift, and now these results. There was a long silence. Then Helen said, very carefully, Margaret, do you remember Richard's family history? Anything unusual? His father, Dorothy's husband, he died before I met Richard. Heart attack when Richard was 15. Do you remember his name? George Henderson. And your father? Thomas Sullivan. Another pause. Margaret, I think you need to talk to someone who knew Dorothy back then. Someone who might know the truth. Who would know? Dorothy's been gone for 12 years. What about her sister? Didn't she have a younger sister? I'd forgotten about Aunt Pauline, Dorothy's younger sister, who'd moved to Vancouver decades ago. I'd only met her a handful of times at family gatherings. She was in her late 80s now. I'll try to find her number. It took 2 days of searching, but I found her. Pauline Blackwell, living in a senior's residence in Vancouver. When I called and explained who I was, Richard's widow, she went quiet. I wondered if anyone would ever figure it out, she said finally, her voice papery with age. Dorothy made me promise never to tell. Tell what? Margaret, may I ask? What was your mother's maiden name? Morrison. Anne Morrison. Pauline let out a long breath. And your father was Thomas Sullivan? Yes, Thomas Sullivan, who taught at Westdale Secondary School in Hamilton. My heart stopped. Yes. How did you know that? Because Dorothy had an affair with him. In 1957, she got pregnant. The world tilted. Dorothy was engaged to George Henderson at the time, Pauline continued. George was from a good family, wealthy. Exactly what my parents wanted for Dorothy. But Dorothy was working in Hamilton that summer, setting up a new hotel property. She met your father at a library fundraiser. He was young, handsome, passionate about books and teaching. Everything George wasn't. They had an affair, a brief one. Dorothy broke it off when she realized she was pregnant. She married George immediately, moved the wedding up by 3 months. Everyone assumed Richard was premature. George never questioned it. He was older, not the most perceptive man. And Dorothy made sure they moved to Toronto right after the wedding, away from Hamilton, away from Thomas Sullivan. But my father, he was married to my mother. He married Anne Morrison 2 years later. I don't know if Anne ever knew about the affair. But Margaret, here's what you need to understand. Dorothy kept track of Thomas Sullivan for the rest of her life. She knew when he got married. She knew when he had a daughter. Me. You. And when you showed up at U of T, when you met Richard at that campus mixer, Dorothy knew exactly who you were. The room was spinning again. She knew? She knew. And she let it happen. She let you marry Richard because in her twisted way, she thought it was poetic. Her son marrying the daughter of the man she'd loved and lost, keeping everything in the family. But we were siblings. Richard and I were siblings, half-siblings, and Dorothy didn't care. In her mind, Thomas had abandoned her, though really, he never knew about the pregnancy. She felt he owed her something, and when you fell in love with Richard, she saw it as fate. Her bloodline, unified. Why didn't she tell us? Because she knew you'd never go through with it if you knew. And by the time you were married, you were married. She wasn't going to blow up her son's life. She just watched. And in her own way, I think she enjoyed the secret, the power of knowing something no one else did. I felt sick. Did Richard know? No. Dorothy never told him. She took that secret to her grave. Pauline paused. Margaret, I'm sorry. I should have said something years ago. But Dorothy was my sister, and she made me swear. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment, trying to process what I'd learned. I'd spent 43 years married to my half-brother. My daughters were the product of incest, even if unwitting. Everything I'd built my life on was a lie. And Dorothy, cold, disapproving Dorothy, had known all along. She'd let me marry Richard, knowing the truth. She'd watched me struggle to fit into the Henderson family, knowing I was already a Henderson by blood. She'd made me feel inadequate, inferior, when all along I was her daughter. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. So did you do the test? Find out you're actually a Morrison after all? I stared at the message. Vanessa had no idea what she'd unleashed with her birthday gift. She'd meant to humiliate me, to prove I didn't belong to the Henderson family. Instead, she'd revealed that I belonged to them more than anyone had ever imagined. But I couldn't tell her. Could I? If I revealed the truth, I'd destroy my daughter's understanding of their own identity. They'd know their father was their uncle. They'd know their entire existence was the result of a secret Dorothy had kept to satisfy some twisted sense of romantic justice. And what about Richard's memory? He'd been a good man. He'd loved me genuinely. None of this was his fault, but the secret was eating me alive. I spent 3 days in my apartment, not answering calls, trying to decide what to do. Helen stopped by on the 4th day, let herself in with the spare key I'd given her, and found me still in my bathrobe, the apartment dark. Margaret, you can't do this to yourself. What am I supposed to do? Helen. Tell my daughters they're the product of incest? Tell them their grandmother knowingly let this happen? You tell the truth. Because Vanessa's not going to let this go. She's too invested in proving you don't belong. Helen was right. 2 days later, Vanessa called. So, Mom, did you do the test? I've been dying to know. I did the test. And? I think we should meet. All of us. You, me, and Claire. Why? What did it say? We should do this in person. I heard the excitement in her voice. She thought she'd won. She thought I was going to reveal some shameful secret about being adopted or illegitimate. She had no idea. We met at a cafe in Yorkville the following Sunday. Claire looked uncomfortable. Vanessa looked triumphant. So, Vanessa said, leaning back in her chair. What did the DNA test reveal? Are you actually a Henderson or not? I took a breath. I am a Henderson. Very much so. Vanessa frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Dorothy Henderson was my biological mother. The color drained from both their faces. That's not possible, Claire said. Grandma Dorothy was Dad's mother. She was also mine. Vanessa shook her head. No, you're confused. You must be misreading the results. I'm not. Dorothy had an affair in 1957 with a man named Thomas Sullivan. She got pregnant with Richard. Years later, Thomas married Ann Morrison. They had a daughter. Me. I watched them process this. Watched them do the math. You're saying, Vanessa said slowly, that you and Dad were siblings? Half-siblings. Neither of us knew. Dorothy never told anyone. Claire's hand went to her mouth. That means we're the result of a relationship between half-siblings. Yes. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair fell backward. This is insane. You're lying. I'm not lying. I have the DNA results. I spoke with Dorothy's sister Pauline. She confirmed everything. Why would Grandma do that? Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Why would she let you marry Dad if she knew? I don't know. Power. Control. Some twisted sense of romantic fate. Pauline said Dorothy felt my father owed her something. Vanessa's face had gone from white to red. This is your fault. You must have known. You must have. I didn't know, Vanessa. I had no idea. But you slept with your own brother. You had children with him. That's disgusting. That's illegal. It wasn't knowing. There's a difference. There's no difference, Vanessa was shouting now, and people were staring. "You're sick. This whole family is sick, and you knew. You must have known. No one could be that stupid." Claire was crying silently, tears running down her face. "I'm so sorry," I said to her. "I never wanted either of you to find out this way. I never wanted you to find out at all. But you made me do that DNA test," Vanessa hissed. "You could have just ignored it. You could have let it go. You wouldn't have let it go. You wanted to prove I didn't belong. Well, congratulations, Vanessa. You proved I belonged more than you ever imagined." Vanessa grabbed her purse. "I'm leaving. Don't call me. Don't text me. I need time to process this. This nightmare you've created. I didn't create this, Vanessa. Dorothy did. And you pushed for the truth. Stay away from me." She stormed out of the cafe. Claire remained, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. "I don't know, sweetheart. Are we genetically compromised? Is that why I've had 3 miscarriages?" My heart broke. Claire had been trying to get pregnant for 5 years. "I don't know. You should talk to a genetic counselor. But many half-sibling relationships produce healthy children. You and Vanessa are both healthy. But the risk, I know." She stood up. "I need some time too, Mom. It's a lot. I understand." She left. I sat alone in the cafe, surrounded by the wreckage of my carefully constructed life. The next 3 weeks were the darkest of my life. Neither daughter would speak to me. I left messages, sent texts, got nothing back. Helen checked on me daily, but even her kindness couldn't fill the void. Then, on a Wednesday morning, my phone rang from an unknown number. "Mrs. Henderson? This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates Legal Services. I'm calling regarding the estate of Pauline Blackwell." My heart sank. "Did she pass away?" "Yes, last week. I'm sorry for your loss. She listed you as a beneficiary in her will." "Me? Why?" "She didn't specify. But she left you a sealed envelope with instructions that it be delivered to you personally. I can courier it, or you're welcome to come to our Vancouver office. Please courier it." The envelope arrived 2 days later. Inside was a letter in shaky handwriting. "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you've learned the truth about Dorothy's secret. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while she was alive. She was my sister, and I loved her, but what she did was wrong. There's something else you should know. After Dorothy died, I found documents among her papers. She kept meticulous records of everything, including a second will. Dorothy's official will left everything to Richard and, after his death, to be divided among his heirs. But she had another will, written a year before she died, that she never filed with her lawyer. In it, she acknowledged you as her daughter, and left a substantial portion of her estate to you directly. She never filed it because she couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth. But I kept it, and I've instructed my lawyer to validate it and ensure you receive what Dorothy meant for you to have. You deserved better than what Dorothy gave you in life. Perhaps this can give you some peace. With love, Aunt Pauline." Attached to the letter was a copy of Dorothy's unfiled will. She'd left me $2.3 million and her collection of rare books worth at least another $500,000. Also attached was a handwritten note from Dorothy herself, dated just months before her death. "Margaret, if you're reading this, you know the truth. I should have told you years ago. I should have stopped the wedding. But I was a coward. I loved Thomas Sullivan. He was the only man I ever truly loved. When I saw you fall for Richard, I saw a second chance for the Sullivan and Henderson bloodlines to unite. It was selfish. It was wrong, but I couldn't stop it. You were always my daughter, even when you didn't know it. You were always a Henderson. I'm sorry I made you feel otherwise. The money is yours. Do with it what you will. Tell the girls or don't. But know that I did love you, in my broken, terrible way. Dorothy." I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. I forwarded copies of everything to Vanessa and Claire. Then I waited. Claire called first. "Mom, I saw the documents." "Yes, Grandma Dorothy left you money." "She did. A lot of money." "Yes." There was a long pause. "Vanessa's going to fight this. She's already talking about contesting it. She says you manipulated a dying old woman. I never even met Pauline until after Dorothy died. And I certainly never asked for any of this." "I know. But Vanessa, she's not handling any of this well. The DNA revelation, the money, everything. She's talking about suing you. For what? Fraud. Emotional distress. I don't know, Mom. She's not making a lot of sense. What about you? How are you handling it? Claire was quiet for a long moment. I went to a genetic counselor. She said the risk of birth defects from a half-sibling relationship is elevated but not certain. My miscarriages could be related or could be completely separate. We don't know. I'm so sorry, Claire. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. She paused. I don't blame you, Mom, but I need more time. This is still so fresh. I understand. We hung up. An hour later, I received a formal letter from Vanessa's law firm informing me they were contesting Pauline's will on the grounds of undue influence and demanding I submit to a psychiatric evaluation to ensure I was competent to receive the inheritance. It was vindictive and cruel, and exactly what I'd expected from Vanessa. The legal battle took 8 months. Vanessa fought every step, tried every angle. She claimed I'd manipulated Pauline. She claimed Dorothy had been senile when she wrote the second will. She claimed I'd known all along about the sibling relationship and had trapped Richard into marriage. None of it worked. Pauline's will was airtight. Dorothy's unsubmitted will was validated by handwriting experts and dated clearly. And multiple witnesses, including Dorothy's longtime lawyer, testified that Dorothy had been of sound mind until the very end. The judge ruled in my favor. The $2.8 million, plus legal fees paid by Vanessa's failed lawsuit, was mine. Vanessa stopped speaking to me entirely after that. She blocked my number, returned my letters unopened. Claire stayed in tentative contact, calling once a month or so, always brief, always careful. She was trying, but the weight of what she'd learned had fundamentally changed our relationship. I took the money and established a scholarship fund at U of T for students from modest backgrounds studying library science. The Margaret Sullivan Henderson Scholarship, named for both my parents, the ones who raised me and the one who birthed me. I also donated $250,000 to genetic counseling services for families dealing with unexpected DNA revelations. If my story could help someone else navigate this nightmare, perhaps some good could come from it. The rare books I kept. They'd been Dorothy's passion, and they were beautiful first editions, signed copies, volumes going back centuries. I spent my evenings cataloging them, learning their stories. In a strange way, it made me feel closer to the mother I'd never known I had. On my 66th birthday, I had a small dinner with Helen and a few friends from the library. No DNA tests, no cruel surprises, just a quiet celebration of another year survived. My phone buzzed as we were having cake. A text from Claire. Happy birthday, Mom. Thinking of you. Maybe we can have lunch next week. It wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. But it was something. A small bridge across the chasm that Vanessa's gift had created. I texted back. I'd like that very much. As I blew out the candles, I thought about Dorothy, about Thomas Sullivan, about Richard, about all the secrets and lies that had shaped my life, about Vanessa's cruelty and Claire's cautious kindness. I'd spent 66 years not knowing who I really was, and in a strange way, I still didn't. Was I Margaret Sullivan, the librarian from Hamilton? Margaret Henderson, the widow from Forest Hill? Or someone else entirely, a woman shaped by secrets she'd never chosen, living a life built on foundations of sand? But perhaps it didn't matter. Perhaps we're all just collections of the stories we tell ourselves, true or not. And maybe the only story that really mattered was the one I chose to tell from here forward. I was Margaret. I'd survived Dorothy's schemes, Richard's unknowing participation, and Vanessa's cruelty. I'd claimed my inheritance, both the money and the terrible knowledge it came with, and I was still here, still standing, still capable of hope. That, in the end, was enough.